Some men walk into a room and change it without saying a word. Marcos Souza was that kind of man. Nobody gave Marcos Souza a record. No organization, no commission, no sanctioned body, with a clipboard and a rulebook. The man had nothing on paper, no professional bouts, no amateur wins, no documented losses. Just years. Years of training in a concrete lot in one of Rio's most unforgiving neighborhoods, where the only feedback you ever got was whether you hit the ground or the other guy did. He started fighting before he had a word for it. At 12, in a lot, behind the market, where his uncle sold salvaged parts. A bigger kid wanted something that wasn't his. Marcos didn't let him take it. That was the beginning. Not romantic. Not mythological. Just a kid who didn't back down, and then never stopped. By his early 20s he had built something. Not a resume, a reputation. In his neighborhood, among the guys who trained in the streets and the makeshift gyms with cracked mirrors and broken equipment, Marcos Souza was considered something different. The way he moved, the way he absorbed damage and answered back with combinations that didn't follow any script anyone had seen before. His style wasn't classical. It wasn't taught from a curriculum. It was built from what worked in that yard, on that concrete, against those opponents. And what worked had made him something worth watching. He'd trained in pieces of capoeira. He'd absorbed wrestling from a cousin who came back from 2 years of competitive clubs in Sao Paulo. He'd picked up Muay Thai clinch work from bootleg video collections downloaded toda on a slow connection and watched 100 times over. Nothing was unified. Nothing was polished. But when it came together on the mat, it was fluid in a way that didn't look like anything anyone was teaching at the time. The video that changed everything wasn't even supposed to be shared. One of the guys in the lot filmed a 30-second clip of Marcos drilling against a heavy opponent. An older man from the neighborhood who had been training fighters for 15 years. Marcos swept him twice, reversed a choke, and finished a takedown in under a minute. The older man got up laughing. The clip got shared. And somehow, through layers of shares and reposts, and someone who knew someone who trained at a gym in the United States, it landed in front of someone who mattered. Coach Travis Hendricks had been running Apex Combat Academy in Las Vegas for 11 years. He had taken fighters from regional obscurity to national rankings. He had produced champions at multiple weight classes and sent more than a dozen athletes to the premier organizations in the sport. Travis did not get surprised easily. When he watched the clip, he watched it 3 times. Then he made a call. The offer wasn't glamorous. 2 weeks of observation. No contract, no promises, no guaranteed placement. Come train, see what happens. Travis wasn't offering Marcos a career. He was offering him a look. Whether anything came of it depended entirely on what Marcos brought through the door. What Marcos had in his pocket when he landed in Las Vegas was the equivalent of enough cash for 2 weeks of budget accommodation, a duffel bag with 2 sets of clothes and 1 pair of training shoes, and the address of the gym. Nothing else. No agent, no translator, no history that meant anything outside Rio. He took a cab from the airport. He watched the city through the window the whole way without saying a word. Apex Combat Academy was not what most people imagined when they heard the word gym. It wasn't just large. It was deliberate. 4 regulation octagon cages, a wrestling room with a full wall of mirrors, a strength and conditioning area that belonged in an Olympic facility, coaches who had trained under the best in the world, and fighters, serious, focused, professional fighters who had earned their place in that building through years of verified performance. The first morning, nobody talked to Marcos much. That wasn't hostility, exactly. It was the culture of the place. You didn't earn conversation at Apex. You earned it by what you showed on the mat. Travis had introduced him briefly as a trial athlete from Brazil, and the room had filed that information away and returned to what it was doing. That suited Marcos fine. He had not come here to talk. He warmed up alone. And the moment he started moving, the room noticed. It wasn't what he was doing. It was how. His warm-up movement had a quality that was hard to name. Unpredictable in its angles. Rhythmic, but not repetitive. The kind of looseness that only comes from 10,000 hours in the body. Fighters who had been around long enough to know what they were looking at slowed their own drills down. Nobody said anything. They just started watching. Derek Cole had been training at Apex for 4 years. He was 29 years old, ranked third nationally in his weight class, and was considered by most people in the building to be the most complete fighter in the gym. That wasn't arrogance. It was consensus earned over years of performance. Derek won consistently, beautifully, efficiently. He had the kind of technical mastery that made sparring sessions look like lessons he was giving, not jazz he was having. Derek saw the Brazilian on that first day. He assessed him the way he assessed everyone. Clinically, economically. The kid moved well. Different. But different wasn't the same as dangerous. Derek had seen fighters with unusual styles before. They were interesting puzzles for about 90 seconds until you figured out the pattern. He didn't lose sleep over it. The first time Marcos sparred, it was against one of the gym's mid-level fighters. A solid professional with a regional championship on his record. 3 minutes, light contact, just enough to see the shape of things. Marcos came in low, hands relaxed, posture that read as almost careless until the moment it wasn't. The gym fighter landed the first punch, a clean, standard jab. And then Marcos slipped it. Not ducked. Slipped, at an angle that didn't appear in any manual, a rolling lateral shift that put him inside the guard while simultaneously loading a short left hook that arrived on the chin before anyone in the room had processed what was happening. The gym fighter stepped back. Not hurt badly, but rocked. And looking at Marcos with an expression that said this was no longer what he had expected. By the time that session was over, Marcos had submitted that same fighter from the bottom, using a triangle that he had constructed while taking damage for love. A technique that required composure. Most fighters couldn't access when they were already losing ground. The room was not loud about it. But the room had changed. Travis wrote 3 things in his notepad that day. He did not share them with anyone. The challenge match wasn't Travis's idea. It was the room's idea, and Travis allowed it because he understood what it meant. When a gym with the reputation of Apex invites a question about itself, the answer has to happen on the mat. There was a question now. A Brazilian with no record had walked into the building and made serious fighters look momentarily confused. The question was, how far did that go? What happened when it met the real thing? Derek Cole didn't ask for the match. He was offered it, and he accepted it without drama. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatened, or at least he didn't let himself be. He was a professional, and professionals solved problems through preparation. He spent the next several days working on specific counter entries, anti-positioning, anti-clinch positioning, and ground and pound transitions from dominant positions. His training that week was among the hardest of the year. His coaches noted it without comment. Marcos prepared differently. He wrote things in a notebook. Small sketches of movement patterns, not choreography, more like flow diagrams. Entry angles, body position references, the geometry of where he wanted to be when certain moments occurred. He had been doing this since he was 15. His coach back in Rio used to laugh at it. Then he stopped laughing. By Friday night, the match had taken on a life of its own. One of the gym's fighters had posted a vague comment about it on social media, and within hours the conversation had grown past the building. People in the combat sports world were paying attention. A fighter with no record walking into one of America's top training camps and causing problems was a story. The comments were mostly skeptical. A few were curious. A small number were already speaking in the language of legacy. Saturday morning arrived with the gym packed. Every corner occupied. People who didn't usually come to open sessions had found reasons to be there. The energy in the room was controlled but tight. The kind of atmosphere that comes when something is genuinely at stake and everyone knows it. Travis gathered both men in the center of the cage. He didn't make a speech. He said 3 sentences. Compete honestly, compete hard, finish whatever you start. Then he stepped back. What followed was not a spectacle. It was a fight. Derek came in the way he always came in, measured, technical, long. His jab was a rangefinder, accurate and fast, designed to establish space and rhythm. Marcos moved in a way that made that difficult. He didn't stand in front of it. He angled, drifted, moved in 3 dimensions where most fighters moved in 2. The first minute was diagnostic. Sips. Both men reading each other, neither committing to full engagement. Derek's training was visible in every adjustment. He recognized unusual movement and responded with positional discipline rather than aggression. His footwork shifted to cut off the angles. His punches became shorter, cleaner. Marcos landed the first meaningful shot, a leg kick that buckled Derek's left knee for one half step. It was a subtle moment but a significant one. Derek adjusted his weight distribution and stopped presenting the same leg. A piece of information had been exchanged, and both men absorbed it. The takedown came from Derek, and it came hard. An explosive double leg that most fighters at that level would not have sprawled on cleanly. Marcos sprawled on it cleanly. His hips dropped with the timing of someone who had been taken down 10,000 times and had learned to anticipate the precise moment. He got Derek's head and pressed it toward the mat. Derek powered out. He always powered out. His base strength was part of what made him exceptional, and it showed. He cleared Marcos's grip, created separation, and answered with a right hand that arrived on the cheekbone, with a crack that everyone in the room felt. Marcos went back into the cage wall, and Derek followed him. What happened in that exchange against the wall was where the fight changed character. Derek was landing body shots, uppercuts, short right hands, real punches with real power behind them. Marcos was covering well, absorbing intelligently, but he was taking damage. And then, in a moment that seemed to reverse the physics of the situation, Marcos exploded off the wall and pulled Derek into a clinch that turned Derek's attack into Marcos's offense. 3 knees. Short, sharp, driven into Derek's ribs and midsection. The third one made Derek grunt audibly. He pushed free. For the first time in the match, his breathing was showing. Both men bled before it was over. Marcos from a cut above the eye after a clean jab sequence. Derek from a short elbow that Marcos landed off a broken combination. Blood is a common element in fights. What made this particular exchange significant was what it produced in the room. Not horror. Not sympathy. Respect. The involuntary, unannounced kind that comes when you watch two people give their most honest selves. The finish came from Derek. Not as a gift. Not as a mistake by Marcos. It came from Derek executing under pressure with championship-level precision. Marcos had nearly finished an armbar from the bottom, a late-round submission attempt that shocked the building into silence. Derek felt it coming and committed everything to the escape. He rotated, stacked, resisted through pain, and ripped his arm free. He stood over Marcos with full understanding of what had almost happened. And instead of stepping back, he closed the distance with controlled aggression. Secured a takedown, moved to side control, and locked in a rear naked choke. Marcos tapped, Derek released immediately. He stood, his hands went to his knees. He looked at the mat for a moment, collecting himself. He did not celebrate. Not because the win wasn't real. It was absolutely real. Earned at a cost, dragged out of him, by a fight that required more than he had expected to give. He didn't celebrate because something had been revealed that celebration would only have cheapened. A slow clap started from somewhere in the far corner of the room. It built. By the time Derek walked over and extended his hand to Marcos, the entire room was on its feet. Marcos took the hand and got pulled upright. Both men stood face to face. Blood on both of them. Breathing through their mouths, and looked at each other with the particular acknowledgement that only happens between people who have genuinely tested each other at the limit. Coach Travis said nothing. He nodded, once to Derek, once to Marcos. That was everything. The offer went up on the board 3 days later. 6 weeks of sponsored training. Full gym access, coaching included. Marcos read it once, pressed his hand flat against the paper. That was his answer. What changed after that was harder to measure than a record or a result. Derek trained differently. Not harder, necessarily. He had always trained hard. But sharper. The fight with Marcos had revealed a gap. Not a huge one, not an embarrassing one, but a real one. Certain entries, certain angles, certain kinds of unpredictability that his technical game had never fully accounted for. He spent the following weeks closing that gap with the intentionality of a man who understood that the sport at the highest level had no room for comfortable assumptions. Marcos began to change too. The foundation he had built in Rio, raw, intuitive, effective in ways that had surprised a room full of elite fighters. That foundation stayed, but it started taking on new structure. Longer range, more refined setups. The gap between what he knew and what he was now learning began to close in the other direction. 2. Very different kinds of excellence. Had walked into the same room and forced each other to be better. Nobody gave Marcos Souza a record when he arrived in Las Vegas. He left with something harder to file. He left with the understanding that a room full of the best fighters in America had watched him compete at the highest level he had ever competed at. And the last thing anyone that room felt, when it was over, was indifferent. Sometimes that matters more than what's on paper. Sometimes it's the only thing that does.